My name is Kayla Washington, and I just turned 20. It was a Tuesday evening in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, and my parents threw what they called a small family birthday dinner at home. Nothing fancy, just the dining table set with the usual plates, some takeout pizza, a cheap cake from the grocery store, and a couple of candles that barely flickered. No friends, no big crowd, just mom, dad, and my younger sister Mackenzie, sitting there looking like they were waiting for something heavy to drop. I pushed the pizza around on my plate, trying to ignore the weird tension in the air. Dad cleared his throat first, the way he does when he's about to say something uncomfortable. Mom leaned forward, her voice calm but rehearsed. "Kayla, we need to talk. We've never saved anything for your college. We didn't think it was the right investment for you." I froze. Dad jumped in quickly like he couldn't hold it back anymore. "It's not that we didn't want to. We just never believed you were capable of continuing your education or making anything of yourself." Mom added softly, almost like an apology that wasn't really one. "Everything best has already been laid out for Mackenzie. She's the one with the potential." The words hit like a slap I didn't see coming. At 20, I was already in community college working 2 part-time jobs to pay my own way. Barista shifts early mornings, tutoring math online late nights. I'd clawed my way there on scholarships and sheer stubbornness. And now, on my birthday, they were telling me flat out that I'd never been the priority. Mackenzie got the car, at 16 the private lessons, the college fund, the celebrations. Me, I got the message, figure it out alone. They sat there waiting for my reaction, but I just nodded slowly, the room suddenly too quiet. I realized right then that I'd never been the choice they bet on, and that hurt more than any words could say. If you've ever felt like the family backup plan, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story gets a lot more real from here. Stick around to see how I turned it all around. My story of favoritism started long before that birthday dinner. Growing up in our quiet suburb outside Salt Lake City, the difference in how mom and dad treated me versus my younger sister Mackenzie was always present. Subtle at first, but growing sharper over the years. Mackenzie Washington, my younger sister by 3 years, was the one they poured everything into from the beginning. When Mackenzie turned 16, my parents surprised her with a reliable used Honda Civic parked in the driveway, complete with a big red bow on the hood. The keys came during a backyard barbecue they organized just for her, with neighbors' invited balloons floating, and a banner stretched across the garage door reading "Sweet 16." They covered the insurance the first year of gas, and even threw in driving lessons from a professional instructor. At the same age, I had been taking the city bus to school and part-time jobs. Dad handed me a monthly transit pass and said, "This will teach you responsibility. No party, no fanfare, just practical advice." Mackenzie began private art lessons at a respected local studio when she was 12, twice a week, costing nearly $300 a month. Dad insisted she had real talent that needed nurturing, and Mom agreed, saying it was an investment in her future. I had shown interest in sketching too, spending hours with free library books on drawing, but when I asked about lessons, Mom replied gently, "We can't afford extras for everyone. Use the school art club. It's free and good enough." So I did, and kept my work to myself. Birthdays highlighted the gap most clearly. Mackenzie's parties were events. 20 or more friends over catered trays of food, a hired photographer one year, even a rented bounce house when she was younger. Gifts stacked high, new phones, jewelry, designer clothes, whatever she hinted at. Mine stayed small and family only, a supermarket cake, a card with $20 or $30 tucked inside, and Dad's standard line, "Save it for something useful." They opened a dedicated college savings account for Mackenzie when she entered high school, adding regular deposits from Dad's paycheck and tracking its growth on a spreadsheet. Mine was never started, never discussed. Their explanation stayed consistent whenever I noticed the imbalance. "You need to learn to stand on your own feet," Mom would say. "Life won't hand you things on a silver platter," Dad added. They framed it as character-building tough love, turning their unequal support into a virtue. I heard those words so often they blended into everyday background noise, until the birthday confession made them impossible to tune out. That night after they finished speaking, I didn't argue or break down. I simply nodded, once stood up, cleared my plate, and walked to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, letting the silence settle. Then I opened my laptop and began searching job listings. I already had the barista position at the downtown coffee shop, but I applied for additional weekend shifts at a local bookstore and signed up for online tutoring platforms teaching high school math and basic science. If they weren't going to help, I would build everything myself. No exceptions. Over the following weeks, I filled every spare hour. Early mornings behind the espresso machine, afternoons in community college classes, evenings grading assignments or walking students through equations on video calls. Sleep became something I fit in between shifts, meals turned into quick protein bars eaten on the bus. The schedule was exhausting, but it gave me something solid to hold on to. Control over my own path. I stopped asking Mom for small favors like gas money or Dad for help with unexpected expenses. There was no point. Instead, I tracked every dollar earned and spent, creating a strict budget in a simple spreadsheet. Every paycheck went directly toward tuition fees, textbooks, and the savings jar I started for an apartment deposit. The more I earned, the more independent I felt. Mom and Dad noticed the shift. They saw I was coming home less often, answering texts with shorter replies, and skipping family dinners when I could. Mom began sending messages like, "We miss you," "Come home more," or "Family is still here for you." Kayla. Dad forwarded job listings he thought might suit me, entry-level positions that paid minimum wage. It felt like surface concern, not real understanding. They didn't connect my distance to their choices. They thought I was just busy or going through a phase. Meanwhile, Mackenzie continued receiving more. A new laptop for her senior year, expensive photography equipment when she decided to pursue that direction, weekend trips to Salt Lake art galleries with Mom tagging along. I watched from afar, invisible in their pride. The contrast no longer surprised me. It simply pushed me harder. By the end of that summer, I had saved enough for my first semester books at the community college and a secondhand bike to cut down on bus fare. No one at home celebrated or even asked how I managed it. I just kept moving forward, one quiet step at a time, preparing for the transfer to the University of Utah the following fall. That steady progress became my anchor, proof that I could make it without their belief or their money. 1 year later, I walked across the stage at Salt Lake Community College to receive my associate degree in general studies. The ceremony felt small and understated compared to what I imagined a university graduation might be, but it was mine entirely, earned through late-night studying and double shifts that left my hands smelling of coffee grounds for days. No family came to watch. I had told Mom and Dad it was just a low-key event, and they accepted that without pushing. I wore the cap and gown alone, took a quick photo with the diploma, and headed straight back to my tiny shared apartment near campus. The transfer to the University of Utah happened smoothly that fall. At 21, I moved into a studio apartment off campus using the savings I had built from every extra dollar earned over the previous months. The place was basic. A single room with a kitchenette, a small desk pushed against the window, and a bed that doubled as a couch when friends visited. But it was quiet and mine. For the first time, I woke up without hearing the familiar sounds of my childhood home, and that silence felt like freedom. My schedule stayed relentless. Mornings started at 5:30 with the barista shift at the campus Starbucks, where I handled the rush of students grabbing their caffeine fix before lectures. The job paid decently enough to cover rent and utilities, and the free coffee helped when I couldn't afford lunch. Afternoons and evenings shifted to online tutoring sessions through the platform I had joined. I taught algebra, geometry, and introductory statistics to high school students across the state, sometimes logging 4 hours straight after my shift ended. The pay was better than minimum wage, and the flexibility let me fit classes around it. Classes at the University of Utah demanded more focus than community college ever had. I was pursuing a bachelor's in education with a minor in mathematics, hoping to become a tutor or counselor someday for students like me who had to figure things out without much guidance. Professors assigned dense readings group projects and exams that tested endurance as much as knowledge. I studied in the library until closing time, then walked home under streetlights reviewing notes on my phone. Mom began sending texts more frequently during those first months of the semester. They were short, but loaded with the kind of gentle pressure she had perfected over the years. "We haven't seen you in a while, Kayla. Family is still here whenever you're ready." Another one came a week later. "Mackenzie misses you. Come home for dinner soon." I read them, felt the familiar tug of guilt, but typed back brief replies like, "Busy with classes right now," or "I'll try to visit when I can." The exchanges grew shorter on my end until they were little more than acknowledgments. Then the Facebook posts started appearing regularly in my feed. Mom shared photos of Mackenzie at her high school art show, standing proudly next to a large canvas she had painted. The caption read, "So proud of our talented girl. Her work is incredible." Dad commented below with heart emojis and a "That's our star." Another post showed Mackenzie receiving an award for a photography project complete with a new camera Mom had bought her as a reward. The comments flooded in from relatives and friends praising how bright her future looked. I scrolled past them without liking or commenting, feeling the distance widen with every swipe. The guilt trip messages intensified slightly around holidays. Mom texted on Thanksgiving, "We're having the usual dinner. It won't be the same without you." I replied that I had to work a double shift and study for finals, which was true. Christmas brought another wave. "Mackenzie is excited about her new art supplies. Hope you can make it home." I sent a group text wishing everyone happy holidays but stayed in my apartment watching movies alone and eating takeout. The quiet felt better than forcing smiles around a table where I still didn't fully belong. I began setting stricter boundaries. I muted notifications from family chats, checked messages only once a day, and stopped scrolling through their social media feeds. When Mom called, I let it go to voicemail and texted back later with updates about classes or work. Nothing personal, nothing inviting deeper conversation. The pattern became routine. They reached out with surface-level concern. I responded with polite distance, and the gap between us grew wider without any big confrontation. By the end of that first semester at the university, my grades were solid, my savings account had grown modestly, and I had established a rhythm that didn't depend on anyone else. I still felt the occasional sting when I saw Mackenzie's achievements highlighted online, but it no longer derailed me. Instead, it fueled the quiet determination to keep building my life step by step, far from the expectations they had never held for me. A few months into my second semester at the University of Utah, I was grabbing a quick coffee between classes when I spotted Mackenzie standing at the counter. She looked different, taller, more confident, with her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and a new backpack slung over one shoulder. Our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then she smiled wide and waved me over. I hesitated, but walked up anyway. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Mackenzie laughed lightly and said she had come for a campus tour because she was seriously considering applying. "The art program looks amazing, and the photography department is supposed to be one of the best in the state. I figured I'd check it out while I'm in town for a weekend workshop." We stepped aside to a small table near the window, and she started talking fast about how excited she was, the classes she wanted to take, the professors she had researched. I listened, nodding occasionally, sipping my coffee, while my mind raced. It had been over a year since we had spent any real time together, and seeing her here on my campus felt strangely out of place. She didn't seem to notice the awkwardness, just kept going on about how Mom had helped her put together a portfolio, and Dad was already looking at dorm options just in case. Then she paused and looked at me directly. You know, Mom and Dad were actually going to help you with tuition back when you started community college. They talked about it a lot, but they decided against it. They said if they gave you money, you might get complacent. Like you'd stop pushing yourself. They figured struggle would build your character better than handouts ever could. She said it so casually, almost like sharing a funny family story, shrugging her shoulders as if it was no big deal. I felt the air leave the room. My grip tightened on the coffee cup, but I kept my face steady. She continued, oblivious. They always said you were the strong one, the one who didn't need help. Look at you now, though. You're doing great, right? I mean, you made it here without anything from them. That's kind of what they wanted. The words landed like a quiet explosion in my head. Everything clicked into place. The lack of savings, the birthday confession, the way they had framed their favoritism as tough love. It wasn't accidental or financial limitation. It was deliberate, calculated, a choice to let me scrape by while they handed Mackenzie every advantage. They had watched me work myself ragged and congratulated themselves on how my hardship was shaping me into something better. The realization burned hot and cold at the same time, leaving me speechless for a long moment. Mackenzie kept talking about her application essay and how she was nervous about the portfolio review. I nodded along, forcing small responses, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying every time Mom had said, "You'll figure it out," and Dad had replied, "That's how you learn." They hadn't been protecting their resources. They had been testing me, withholding support on purpose to see if I would break or prove their theory right. I didn't confront her. There was no point in ruining her excitement or turning the conversation into something heavy. Instead, I listened until she finished, then glanced at my watch and said I had to get to my next class. She hugged me quickly, said it was great seeing me, and promised to text when she heard back about her application. I watched her walk away, blending into the crowd of students with her easy confidence, the kind that comes from never having to doubt where the next step comes from. The rest of the day blurred. I went through lectures, took notes, participated in discussions, but everything felt distant, muffled by the echo of her words. When I got back to my apartment that evening, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. The anger came first, sharp and immediate, followed by a deeper, colder clarity. This wasn't ignorance or oversight. It was intentional design, a belief that I needed to suffer to succeed while Mackenzie deserved the smooth path. I didn't cry or yell. I just sat there, letting the truth settle until it became something solid inside me. From that moment on, the distance I had been maintaining wasn't just habit anymore. It was necessity. Mackenzie could have her tours, her portfolios, her bright future. I had mine, hard-won and entirely my own, and I wasn't going to let anyone convince me otherwise ever again. Weeks after that campus encounter, the pace I had set for myself finally caught up. I was pulling double shifts at the coffee shop most days, then tutoring until midnight, and squeezing in university assignments whenever there was a gap. Sleep came in short bursts, often interrupted by alarms set for the next commitment, and meals consisted of whatever could be eaten quickly on the go. I told myself it was temporary, that pushing through would get me ahead, but my body had other plans. One morning, I woke up drenched in sweat with a fever that made my head throb and my joints ache. I tried to get out of bed for my shift, but the room spun and I collapsed back onto the mattress. I called out sick for the first time in months, then texted the tutoring platform that I couldn't log in. The fever climbed steadily, reaching over 103 degrees by evening. I spent the next 2 days in bed, alternating between shivering under blankets and sweating through them, barely able to keep water down. When the symptoms didn't break, I dragged myself to the student health center, where the doctor diagnosed a severe case of exhaustion compounded by a viral infection. She prescribed rest antibiotics and time off work, at least a week, maybe more. I texted Mom a short update, not asking for anything, just letting her know I was sick and couldn't work. Her reply came 3 hours later. "Oh no, hope you feel better soon. Drink tea and rest. You've always been so strong." Attached was a digital gift card for $20 with a note saying, "For some soup, or whatever you need. We believe in you." I stared at the screen for a long time. $20. Enough for a few meals, but nothing close to covering lost wages or the rent that was due in 10 days. Meanwhile, I knew from a recent family group chat photo that Dad had just bought Mackenzie a high-end DSLR camera costing over $1,000 because she wanted to expand her photography portfolio for college applications. The contrast was stark and final. Aunt Frances called the following afternoon. She had heard from Mom that I was under the weather and wanted to check in. Her voice was warm and concerned the way it always had been when she visited during holidays. She asked about my symptoms, how I was managing, and whether I needed anything brought over. I answered briefly, said I was resting and managing on my own. She paused, then said gently, "Kayla, you don't have to do everything alone. It's okay to ask for help sometimes. Your parents mean well, but they don't always see the full picture. If you need a break or someone to talk to, I'm here." I thanked her, promised to think about it, but kept the conversation short. When she offered to drive up with groceries, I politely declined, saying I had enough supplies. That call lingered with me after we hung up. Aunt Frances had always been the one family member who noticed the imbalance, who quietly slipped me extra cash when I visited or encouraged me to pursue my own interests without judgment. But even her kindness couldn't bridge the gap that had formed. I appreciated the offer, but accepting it would have felt like admitting defeat, like relying on the same family system that had left me to fend for myself all along. I chose distance instead. I stopped responding to messages promptly. When Mom sent follow-ups asking if the fever had broken or if I needed anything, I waited a day or two before typing back, "Feeling better, thanks." Dad forwarded an article about time management with a note saying, "Thought this might help," and I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. The group chat notifications piled up, but I muted them entirely, only checking once a week to make sure nothing urgent had happened. Mackenzie texted about her latest art project, and I liked the message without commenting. The illness forced a pause I hadn't planned on, but it also brought clarity. Lying in bed with nothing to do but think, I realized the pattern had become unsustainable. Pushing myself to prove something to people who had already decided I didn't need support wasn't strength anymore. It was self-destruction. I needed to protect what little energy I had left, not waste it on maintaining connections that drained me. By the time I returned to work and classes a week and a half later, I had made the quiet decision to pull back further. No more forcing explanations. No more pretending the distance was accidental. I focused on recovery, on rebuilding my routine, on the upcoming exams, and the internship application I had been preparing. The gift card sat unused on my phone, a small reminder that $20 was the extent of their concern when I needed real help. And that was enough to solidify the boundary I had been building for so long. Months after recovering from that illness, I began applying for opportunities that aligned with my major. The first breakthrough came when I received an email offering me a paid internship at the Community Education Center downtown. The position involved designing supplemental learning materials for underserved middle school students and paid $15 an hour for 20 hours a week. It was exactly the kind of hands-on experience I needed, and the income helped stabilize my budget without forcing me to add more tutoring hours. I started the internship the following week, commuting by bike since the center was only a few miles from my apartment. The work felt purposeful, collaborating with teachers to create worksheets, lesson plans, and digital resources that students could access for free. For the first time in a long while, my efforts were recognized directly by supervisors who praised my organization and creativity in feedback sessions. The steady paycheck allowed me to pay bills on time, stock my fridge with real groceries, and even set aside a small emergency fund. Around the same time, I pitched an idea that had been brewing since my recovery: The concept was a simple app for low-income high school students providing free tutoring resources, math tutorials, and study schedules tailored to their needs. The university had a small innovation fund for student-led projects, and I submitted a proposal outlining the app's features, potential impact, and basic development plan. To my surprise, the review committee approved a modest grant of $2,500 to cover initial programming costs, cloud hosting, and a few months of part-time developer support. The grant came with a requirement to present progress at a campus showcase, so I reached out to my friend Melanie, who was majoring in computer science. Melanie had always been supportive, listening to my ideas without judgment and offering practical advice. When I explained the project, she immediately offered to help with the pitch deck and even volunteered to handle the front-end design. We met twice a week in the library, working late into the evenings, refining wireframes, writing code snippets, and preparing the presentation slides. Her enthusiasm kept me motivated, especially on days when doubts crept in about whether the app would actually make a difference. The showcase went better than expected. I stood in front of a small audience of faculty donors and fellow students, describing the app's purpose, demonstrating a working prototype, and explaining how it targeted students who couldn't afford private tutors. Melanie handled the technical questions smoothly, and when the judges asked about scalability, we had solid answers ready. A week later, I received confirmation that the project had been selected for continued funding with an additional $1,000 allocated for marketing materials and user testing. The recognition felt quiet and earned. No big celebration, just steady progress towards something meaningful. Throughout this period, I kept everything private from my family. I didn't mention the internship in our sporadic texts, didn't share photos of the center or the grant award email. Social media stayed dormant. No updates, no stories, no posts about late nights coding or successful presentations. When Mom sent her usual check-in messages asking how classes were going, I replied with vague positives like busy but good, or classes are challenging in a good way. Dad occasionally forwarded job listings again, entry-level positions unrelated to my field, and I acknowledged them politely without engaging further. Mackenzie texted about her senior year activities, and I responded with short congratulations but nothing more. The silence wasn't born from anger anymore, but from self-preservation. Sharing my accomplishments would have invited questions, comments, or comparisons that I no longer wanted to navigate. I had learned that their reactions often came with subtle reminders of how I had made it, despite everything, as if my success was proof of their approach, rather than in spite of it. Keeping my life separate allowed me to enjoy the wins without the emotional weight of their perspective. As the semester progressed, the internship became more demanding with additional responsibilities like leading small workshops for students. I found myself energized by the work, watching kids light up when they understood a concept they had struggled with for months. The tutoring app prototype evolved too, adding features like progress trackers and a community forum for questions. Melanie and I celebrated small milestones with coffee runs and late-night brainstorming sessions, turning what started as a class project into something with real potential. By the end of that academic year, I had saved enough from the internship and grant to upgrade my laptop and cover summer tuition for an extra course. I felt a quiet pride in how far I had come, not because I had proven anyone wrong, but because I had built stability on my own terms. The successes stayed mine alone, shared only with Melanie and the few professors who mentored me. That privacy gave them space to grow without outside expectations, and for the first time in years, I began to look forward to what came next. The following spring, Mackenzie submitted her application to the University of Utah, focusing on the art and design program with an emphasis on photography. She sent in her portfolio essays and recommendation letters, including one from her high school teacher and another from a family friend in graphic design. I found out about it through a brief text she sent asking if I knew any professors in the department who could offer advice on the curriculum. I replied that I didn't have those connections but wished her the best with the process. A couple of weeks later, while checking my university email, I received a message from the internship coordinator in the College of Fine Arts thanking me for serving as a reference for Mackenzie Washington. She had listed my name without asking or mentioning it beforehand. The research assistant position was highly competitive, offering only a few spots each semester and requiring strong academic preparation research skills and the ability to manage independent projects. Her application included my contact information alongside her other references. I read the email twice before deciding what to do. Ignoring it crossed my mind, but the coordinator specifically requested a statement on her readiness and fit. I arranged a short meeting with Professor Elena Ramirez, who oversaw the program and had taught one of my education electives the previous semester. We met in her office on a calm afternoon with sunlight filtering through the blinds. Professor Ramirez opened the conversation directly. "Your sister applied for the RA position and listed you as a reference. I'd like your honest assessment of her preparation since you know her background." I spoke carefully and factually. Mackenzie has real talent in creative fields like photography, but she's told me multiple times that she finds the technical and analytical parts of projects challenging. She's mentioned struggling with structured research and lab-style reports, and doesn't have much experience with independent academic work yet. I don't believe she's fully prepared for this level of responsibility right now. The professor listened, nodded, and took notes, asking a few clarifying questions about Mackenzie's study habits and ability to handle deadlines. I answered based on what I knew from conversations over the years, staying honest without exaggeration. She thanked me for the insight, saying it aligned with some weaknesses in the application materials, particularly the writing sample and research component. Mackenzie received the rejection letter shortly after. The response was courteous, explaining that while her artistic work showed promise, the committee recommended additional foundational courses before pursuing such an intensive role. She called me that evening, her voice edged with frustration. "I didn't get the internship. They said my application wasn't a good fit. Did you speak to them?" The professor mentioned consulting a reference, and I know I put your name. I kept my response steady. "Yes. Professor Ramirez contacted me and asked about your readiness." I told her the truth. "That you've said before how difficult you find certain academic tasks and that you might not be ready for this yet." Silence stretched across the line, then she said sharply, "You could have just said something supportive. Why did you have to be so blunt?" "This mattered to me," I answered calmly. "I wasn't going to lie, Mackenzie. If the role needs skills you're still developing, pretending otherwise wouldn't help you or them. You'll find other opportunities that fit better." She ended the call abruptly after a clipped goodbye. I placed the phone down, feeling the weight of the moment but also a sense of resolution. The exchange had been short, direct, and final. I had refused to soften reality to preserve comfort or appearances. Mackenzie didn't reach out again immediately, and when messages eventually came, they were brief, formal updates about her senior projects or college plans without the usual casual tone. The rejection rippled through the family in subtle ways. Mom texted a few days later noting Mackenzie is disappointed about the internship, but she's staying positive. "We're proud of her effort." I didn't respond. Dad sent nothing further. The incident shifted the dynamic quietly. Mackenzie focused more on other college options, though she still listed the University of Utah as a top choice. I returned to my internship and tutoring project, allowing the distance to deepen without any need for explanation. The entire situation underscored what I had come to understand over time. I was no longer willing to serve as a safety net or a source of easy validation. By choosing honesty over convenience, I removed myself from the role they had assigned me. Mackenzie would now face the full weight of her own path, just as I had faced mine, without my name as a crutch or my voice as a cushion. That felt like the only fair outcome left. The summer after Mackenzie's rejection brought an unexpected opportunity. The university's Center for First Generation Success reached out because they were featuring student stories in their newsletter and campus blog. They wanted to highlight first generation transfer students who had succeeded despite limited family support. I agreed to an interview, figuring it was a chance to share my journey without naming anyone specifically. The article came out a few weeks later, titled From Community College to Campus Leader Kayla Washington's Path to Self-Made Success. It included quotes from me about starting at Salt Lake Community College, working multiple jobs, transferring to the University of Utah, and building independence through scholarships, internships, and determination. The piece mentioned how I had overcome unequal family expectations without going into personal details, just stating that support hadn't been available, so I created my own. Photos showed me in the library during late study sessions and at the education center during my internship. The article went live on the university website and social media channels, and soon spread across student groups, alumni pages, and even some local education forums. Within days, I started receiving messages from classmates, professors, and even strangers saying the story had resonated with them. Some shared their own experiences of navigating college without parental backing. Others thanked me for speaking openly about the challenges. The piece gained traction quietly, but steadily, reaching far beyond the campus community. I didn't promote it myself, but the university's share buttons did the work, and the views climbed steadily. My family found out soon enough. Mom texted first a simple "saw the article about you online. We didn't know you were doing all that." Dad followed with a forwarded link and a short "proud of your hard work." Mackenzie sent nothing directly, but I heard through the grapevine that she had read it and wasn't happy. The article didn't name them or detail the favoritism, but anyone who knew our family would recognize the subtext. The truth had surfaced in a public space, and it left them exposed in a way they hadn't anticipated. Mackenzie's situation worsened over the following months. She had been accepted to the University of Utah, but the scholarship she expected fell through because her application lacked the depth the committee wanted. Without the full funding, my parents had to cover the difference, and they relied on credit cards to bridge the gap. Tuition payments came due, rent for her off-campus apartment added up, and when she struggled in her first semester, they delayed some classes to give her time to adjust. The financial strain became visible. Dad mentioned in a group text that things were tighter than expected, and Mom stopped posting the usual proud updates. Mackenzie worked part-time jobs to help, but the pressure showed in her messages, which grew shorter and more strained. Mom and Dad reached out several times with apologies that arrived too late. One message from Mom read, "We're sorry if we ever made you feel less than. That was never our intention. We love you and want you back in our lives." Dad sent a similar one, adding, "We see now how much you've accomplished. We should have supported you more." I read the words, felt the familiar tug, but chose not to respond. The messages kept coming for a while, then slowed to occasional check-ins that went unanswered. I took the final step one quiet evening. I changed my phone number, blocked their accounts on every platform, and removed myself from family group chats. No dramatic announcement, no last conversation, just a clean break. The silence that followed was complete and peaceful. I didn't check their profiles, didn't wonder what they were doing, and didn't feel the need to explain. No contact became permanent. Mackenzie faced the consequences of their choices too. Without the safety net they had built for her, she navigated college on her own terms, struggling with loans, part-time work, and delayed graduation. My parents dealt with credit card debt, mounting interest, and the quiet realization that favoring one child had cost them the other. They lost the relationship they once took for granted, and the family dynamic shifted permanently. Looking back, the story taught me that love isn't measured by how much you give, but by how fairly you give it. When support is unequal, the favored child may thrive in the short term, but the overlooked one often builds resilience that outlasts everything else. The real lesson is simple: parents who invest unequally risk losing both children in different ways. One through entitlement, the other through absence. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. It means a lot that you listen to every part. If any of this resonates with you, if you've ever felt like the backup plan or the one who had to prove their worth, share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and I know how powerful it can be to know you're not alone. Take care and keep building your own path.